Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Muad'Dib.
The little rat.
Yeah.
Well, I was always known as the little rat, so Muad'Dib is a step up for me. Yeah.
How you doing? And what are we going to do today?
Well, I'm doing okay. I mean, I am recovering from having been to a movie theater, which is universally a traumatic experience. I mean, no
Yes.
colonoscopy in history has ever been as painful as going to a movie theater. It's really just a miserable experience from start to finish. How about you? How was your theatrical experience?
Much similar, to be honest. Yes, went to the cinema, sat down. Wasn't hugely busy because I tried to make it so it was sort of during the day rather than into the evening, which helps. In the weekend, but still on a Sunday, so it was quite a quiet. However, whoever associated sort of like items of food with packaging that makes enormous amounts of noise with the cinema needs to be put on a torture rack and left there for eternity. And also, about 15 minutes into this, a child was there with his grandfather, announced very quietly, very loudly, but also I'd say there's a level of maturity. He just said, "This is too scary for me," and got up and left. So I was like, "Oh, fair play to you." That was it. But yes, you and I went to see Dune Part Two, the continuation of Denis Villeneuve.
Well, at my theater, they informed us, as I know you have heard before, that the show starts 30 minutes late because that's how long the advertisements take.
Yeah.
And so I go into the movie theater, and I'm with a friend, and first of all, it is so loud that I am in physical pain instantly upon stepping into the theater. And I tell my friend, like, first of all, this has already been a terrible experience, just like dirty bathrooms, fucking, just like people running around, smelling that awful popcorn, the ticketing counters are all empty now. They're empty at this place because it's all done electronically.
Machines, yeah.
The tickets were $55 for two people. No food involved, just IMAX, But, I got to watch as people purchase their collectible tin buckets ahead of me, And then, you finally have run the gauntlet and make it to the theater. And I feel like I've now paid people $55 to scream in my face about products that I hate. Like, why would I do this to myself? Who hates themselves so much to go to the movies?
I love the fact that they do. They say like, "Oh, there's bass and there's this." You can feel it in your body, and you go, "That's not so bad." In sort of like the depths of a film's action scene, I don't want to feel that halfway through a McDonald's commercial. Like I don't need my lungs to reverberate whilst I'm learning about insurance. That's
yes, yeah. The Geico lizard should not have this power.
yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. I think it's ridiculous. It's not a fun experience. I'm hoping, as we get into it, the film may have shifted the balance and made it worthwhile. We shall see.
Yes. What were your impressions of the film? It won't change mine, I promise you. First impressions.
First impressions were good, I have to say. Like, I enjoyed the first part. Before we went in, I went and watched the 1984 version and Part One, just to, and watching the 1984 one in particular, there's a kind of like weird comparison to be made to Part One because it sort of moves at a similar kind of pace. Like, the attack on Arrakis by the Harkonnen happens about an hour and something in both versions.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole first part is about the same pace, and then the 1984 one,
Mm.
David Lynch just sort of presses fast forward on a
Yeah.
montage, and you get the rest of the film and the rest of the story. And he's like, I don't understand half of or I don't understand 2/3 of what's going on anymore. You know, but there's some cool scenes and cool dialogue, and you've got the thing like "My name is a killing word" and all this other stuff.
Yeah, that's cool stuff.
And you get the sound
Mm.
weapons, all sort of stuff. I'm like, all right, cool. You got some cool stuff in it, right? Patrick Stewart with a mullet, and that sort of pops up, and so I was like, all right, okay, I'm kind of interested to see how this part of the film is going to be interpreted. I rewatched part one, and I was like, oh, actually, this knows it looked great. Watched it in 4K, looks stunning, like looks amazing. Everyone's actually really good in it. Like I feel like this feels like a tactile film. I feel that everyone's doing a good job. It's one of those films I feel is like it feels like a blockbuster. This feels like a worthy sort of movie experience, and I enjoy it. It's trying to tell a certain story, and I kind of feel that with part two. Part two does the same thing, and I was a little nervous because watching the 1984 version, Paul Atreides comes across or he's portrayed as the conquering hero at the end of the story. Like it rains, everyone on Arrakis is happy, and yay in the credits.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're like, oh, okay, for that story, it works. Like, it's all fine. But I've read the book
Mm-hmm.
long time ago when I was at university, but I've read the book, so I know, and obviously I haven't read the rest of the series, but I know what sort of comes up and how this is going to go. So I was like, I can't believe they're going to go happy ending kind of route. Like that doesn't feel right. So I was curious to see how I was going to feel about things going in. And I was satisfied. I go in. Actually, I really, really enjoyed this. I think it still travels at a hell of a pace, considering it's 2 hours 40 something long, so almost 3 hours long. Still travels at quite a bit of pace at times, then slows down and stuff. But I actually really like everyone's involved. I think Timothée Chalamet is good, for the most part. I think Zendaya impresses me. The longer the film goes, the more Zendaya sort of impresses me. Like towards the end, I think she's better. But yeah, I was like, this cast is doing well. I like the fact that they're going into the sort of political intrigue. The fact that they are sort of saying that this idea of the prophecy is a fabrication from the Bene Gesserit. It's all that sort of stuff and Lady Jessica's going around sort of fueling this in the South and all this political intrigue and stuff. And I'm into all of that. Like I'm really, I'm really enjoying it. And then as it builds up towards the end, I'm like, okay, this is gonna be a good payoff. It's gonna be a good payoff. Like I don't know how they're gonna do it. And then I'm just taken through to the end. So overall, I was like, yeah, this is good. Like it's a really solid film. Did it blow me away? Like there's people going like masterpiece, 5-star reviews, 5 out of 5, and I'm going like, yeah, it's good. It's really good. But I'm like, the hype still feels bigger than the film itself. That's sort of how I came out going. Really solid, really enjoyed it. I will watch this all again as a saga, but like, this isn't earth shattering to me.
Yeah, I have to say I am horrified at that height. I mean, this is a good movie. It's certainly not great. I think it's probably better than part one, which had those terrible structural problems. But this kind of solves those structural problems by being a mess of a movie. And it is a fucking mess from start to finish. It is a disaster. It is just, an abortion of a movie. It really pisses me off. Every scene looks beautiful. It just looks amazing. But as time and time goes on, this is my impression of Dune Part Two. I'm on the red team, known as the Harkonnens. We're going to replace me with my brother. Now he's going to be meaner. Oh no, the meaner brother is in charge. The blue team has to switch up its tactics. Well, I'm a very evil member of the red team, and the blue team's going to suffer as a result. Well, actually, did you know my father isn't actually my father, and actually my real daddy is a member of the red team. Oh, but you forgot about the green team. We're very mystical, I hear, and we have other people. It's like watching medieval costume drama or something where it's like,
This
yeah,
this is a fan.
all of
This
this
is
is stupid, right?
this is a
Like,
fantasy film. This is
yes, it's just dumb. It's just like, I mean, like if Game of Thrones isn't stupid enough for you, we have a really beautiful version of this.
but
I mean,
that's exactly
I
what
am
this is.
this is a 30-minute movie that is stretched to 2.5 hours, and I don't mind because it looks great. Every minute, it's
Oh, I
Denis
disagree with
Villeneuve.
that.
Denis Villeneuve
I think this gets
looked
into
like it's a 30-minute movie. Nothing is important in this movie. This movie makes me long for the David Lynch movie. Not from a visual standpoint, because again, Denis Villeneuve could film a trash can and make you want to propose marriage to it, but the plot is like, for example, you think from a plot standpoint, right? I know a lot happens. I love all of the stuff with the Messiah stuff, all of the Bene Gesserit scheming. I think that's really well done, especially at the end. That's all stuff that is there in the book
Mhm.
and is challenging material to film that this does a really great job of doing. But most of the plot is totally irrelevant and demonstrably so. So, for example, like there's tons of time given to the transition of Fred Rotha Harkonnen, right, the more sadistic, taking over for his less sadistic brother, right? And there's a lot of characterization given to him. He's a totally cardboard character. His one trait is that he's a sadist,
Mm.
in a house that is defined by being
Sadism.
fat and sadomasochism
Yeah.
and pederasty in the original novel, which they took out because they toned this shit down actually.
Mm.
But okay, so one brother took up for the other brother. What is the result of that? An attack that attacks their their base. It's destroyed. Why does that matter? It doesn't.
I have
So
to
why
agree.
does
There are certain bits. Oh, well, we'll get
why
into it, but yeah, there are
so
certain
now he
things.
defeats the brother. So why, anyone looking at this from a film perspective, from a script perspective, would say consolidate those two brothers. You
Mm.
don't need to have two brothers and devote 40 minutes of time to the transition, from one brother to the other. Just have the first brother adapt a slightly different tactic because his tactic isn't working, if that's important to you. But then you say, why is that important to you? Just to show that the Fremen have incurred cultural losses as part of this? Okay, that's fine. But I mean, you start to take this apart like that and really look at what any component is doing, and the whole thing starts to fall apart,
Yeah,
like
I agree.
a house of cards.
There is this thing. No, I disagree with some of what you're saying. I don't
Okay.
think this is a 30-minute movie in 3 hours. I think there's a lot going on in parts. What I would say is there's an element of I do really enjoy the first film, and I definitely enjoy both these films more than you do. However, this thing of going like, this is where I'm at a point where people say, "Oh, this is science fiction." No, this is sci-fi fantasy. Like this is no different to Lord of the Rings. Like, um, in the sense of like the locations change, how they travel between places change, but generally this is, you know, evil people versus good people. This is it's a war thing in a similar thing. This is no. So, do you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
science fiction. It's a science fiction setting telling fantasy stories.
a medieval story, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, a high medieval sort of like fantasy story. Um, so it's the political intrigue stuff that worked in the sort of the relatively well in the first one, for me at
mhm,
least, where they were like, oh, it's quite clear that the Atreides are being put in place because they're becoming so popular that they're becoming a potential threat to the Emperor's lineage. But he can't be seen to wipe them out on his own accord, so he has to sort of create this thing so the Harkonnens can get blamed, and no one will stand against the Harkonnens, so it protects himself. You get all that in the first film, so that all that's been set
mhm.
up. So then you are left with the Harkonnens being this ultimate bad. And this is where I do agree that although I like Dave Bautista in both these films, I think he's doing a good job against some of the cast. He gets a pretty strong cast and he sort of holds his own. I mean, he doesn't have to do a great deal, but like you're right though. This thing of like so him as Beast Raban or Raban, compared to Fayed Rotha, you're a bit like cool. why are they being replaced? Because there should, there's not like a morality line that like the Beast will like, oh, I won't cross that line, or I can't do that thing. So we're bringing Fayed in to do it differently. Like it's basically sort of like you've had enough time, so they're going to do it. But all he does is build on the work you've already done. Like he doesn't. You're right on that. So I appreciate what you're saying there. Um, but there's this
Well,
thing of like legacy. It's more
even
about go on.
even more to that point, it's beautiful, but why do we have that entire arena sequence? The entire arena sequence is to show we're a mean house, and the
No,
new
it's more.
guy
Yeah,
is
it's
willing to fight.
well, no, I think so. For me, that scene is set up for the final fight. That all that there is to
Yeah,
show how mean he is, but also to show that because he's
he can
wearing
fight.
he can fight, and he's also willing to put himself on that because up until this point, like it's made clear that he's done a lot of these fights, but they've always been poisoned, and
Right.
then all of a sudden you find that one of the guys isn't poisoned, and he turns off the protective suit, so
I know.
he's able
Right,
to
right,
do it.
right,
And that sets up his
right.
ability to be able to fight Paul at the end of the film. Like that's him as a
I agree
valid
with
threat.
you.
So it's going to be there. So it's there for that
But
purpose.
so, like, this is what I mean. Why is that important? It's important to demonstrate that he has fought. So all we need is a fight scene with him prior to Paul to show that
Mm-hmm.
he can fight. There are a million ways of doing that a lot more efficiently and actually a lot better in terms of showing his prowess than that scene. I mean, he is a privileged guy who has always fought rigged fights except for one time, and then he's going to be the big bad who Paul fights at the end. Actually, that diminishes him as a final villain. It doesn't
Mm.
enhance him. But what we do get is a lot of machinations with what does his father believe in him? Is he,
Is his
going
uncle?
to,
But yeah,
he's a sadist, but he's been doing rigged fights. Like, we know an awful lot of backstory. There are answers to any question you should ever have about Dune that has an answer with lore. It's just that none of it really matters. It's all stupid.
yeah. But it's this thing about
I'm
lore.
sorry to interrupt. It's
No,
just I
no, no,
had
no,
to
no. You
point
are
out
right. I think this is the
that
thing. I
scene
think
from a
this is,
structural perspective is not important. It's fine.
but it's this thing of lore, isn't it? You say about lore. So let's because I think we are getting into with a lot of these films that lore is in LORE, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is one of those things that has become
Data's brother, I know.
Yeah, but to talk about this thing of like, let's talk about this in the sense of like a fantasy film, like, story lore is becoming increasingly important for these things because that's how you get spin-offs and the novels and sequels and all sort of shit that like, that's what they do. There's a point to these things because as a viewer, and you come at it from like, let's say a narrative efficiency standpoint, or are you taking it as like this is world building and it's setting up a whole bunch of other things as well? Because not only that, you're setting up you want to see the Harkonnen world. Like, how does the Baron run his world? Oh, it's got gladiatorial combat. This is how the families work. It's a black and white world. This is what the court of the Harkonnens looks like. Like, it's all filling those gaps in from a
Great.
visual and
Sure.
that's what it's there to do. So it's serving multiple purposes from that point of view. Yeah, yes, you're watching Fayed have this have this fight and stuff, but it serves other purposes as well. Like it's showing how the people sort of worship the Harkonnen family and the size of their sort of thing. Like it's showing it's showing this other stuff as well. Like behind the curtains. That's how I felt about it. Like that's how I feel about a lot of these things. Like you are seeing things.
Yeah.
If anything, I
But
feel
it's so dumb. I
nah,
mean, it's not dumb like Star Wars, Marvel dumb, right? But it's still dumb. And this what I mean is like, look, visually it's amazing. But what I mean is like there are different levels of like you're talking about lore and world building, right? World building is, like something Dune is doing a lot better than other franchises, right?
yeah.
Where it's like, well, why, Star Wars is like, well, how do they warp around? Doesn't matter. We got these crystals that power lightsabers, but there's no economy for that. It doesn't really matter. It's there when we need it. It's not when we don't, right? That's an example of like, no, you've injected lore, but you have not built a world around it, right? There is no larger world. Dune does a much better job. There are these houses, we know the spice is important and what it does, and I know all the answers to these questions from the book and from the past movies. I mean, um, I've read at least Dune Messiah. I know, and I summaries of the rest. I mean, I know this world, right? I've read comics of it. I mean, I know all of this stuff. It does a better job of fleshing out that world, right? You're right. But still, so I mean, at least there is a world building in that sense, right? Like Guardians of the Galaxy has no world building. It's
No.
just arbitrary shit, right?
Yes, agreed.
That's lore, maybe, but it's not world building. This is much more doing world building, but it's still not quite doing it in my mind. Like, for example, you're talking about the Harkonnen. It's like, I get it. They're mean. Everyone worships the Atreides too. Everybody treats them as, so it's like, okay, why is this such a medieval setup? Why, like they execute like Darth Vader, like, anyone who annoys them, they murder, right? How is that functional over time? I mean, how do you have so many houses that are so savage and so completely dysfunctional? And it's just like, well, we're the sadomasochistic house. Okay, that's cool from a design perspective, but I don't understand how this actually works. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but
the truth is, it doesn't matter. Because
No,
all that matters is a bunch of medieval houses warring each other. One of them uses dragons and the other one uses technology. I mean, and there's an emperor. What's his function? Well, I could kind of tell you, but it really doesn't matter. None of the answers to these questions are satisfying from a logical perspective. They're really satisfying. And maybe I'm just not a science fantasy guy. And this is what I said about like Star Wars. It's just like, it looks good. When we reviewed Star Wars, I'm like, it looks really good. It only looks better over time. Like it's kind of amazing. This movie looks really good. But I watch it and I'm like, I like these themes. I like the Messiah stuff. I love the plans within plans. If you really start taking apart those plans, none of them make sense.
But I think this is, and I think you're right. This is the key to this thing is sci-fi fantasy.
I'm grumpy.
No, curmudgeonly. That's I think the thing is, this is the thing around sci-fi fantasy, isn't it? This is that key point that they all follow, or fantasy in general, to me, for my experience. I could be wrong. I'm not. This is a generalized term. I haven't read all high fantasy. I don't know all things. But anything that dips into this thing has to have teams, as you said, right? There's the houses. Game of Thrones is explicitly that. Star Wars is exactly the same. You could say, okay, we have the Clone Army and the Republic, and then we have the Sith and the Jedi, and then they even break down even further into like, these other like the sisters of, Waffle Waffle, whatever. Like there's always going to be something that goes down even further. And this is the same. Dune is the same. Like Dune is exactly, and well, Dune came before Star Wars. And it's quite clear Star Wars may have influenced quite a lot. But you're right. You got the Atreides, you got the Harkonnens, you got the Emperor, others that get named in the book, and then you got the Bene Gesserit that are doing their thing. They have sort of like mystic, because it's not. There's no science in this. They have mysticism. They literally drink a product. They drink a poison, and they have psychic powers like that. It's not. This is magic, and they are worshipped for it. They become a sort of like an order of people that have powers and are worshipped, like a monastic order, if you will. This is the thing. Like you have to be able to buy into this world order for this to work. Now, do you say like the thing is, if you buy into like, the Harkonnens, for example, of that world, that it's one of those things where they'll be like, well, it's a thing of like, they're trying to describe as more animalistic, don't they? It's that kind of thing. You are looking at a world that's more like survival of the fittest, strongest leader at the top, that sort of thing. Like that, it's even the way it's portrayed is like, sadomasochistic. There's a lots of like black leather, and they're trying to have that sort of like more sleek, sort of like, black and white kind of look for it. I'm not saying that there's tropes in all of this. That there are tropes being used for world building, which I think is shorthand for things. But my point being is that you have to be able to buy into this world order to be able to buy it. And I think that's the problem with sci-fi fantasy.
But there's no world order. I mean, it's just moving pieces. I mean, the problem is it's just moving pieces on a chessboard that you design, right? It's
Hmm.
just like we're in Middle Earth now, and here's the map, and person A is going to move here, and then they're going to get married to person B, and then they're going to kill person C, and person C is going to get revenge on person A, and you're like, right, this is the way I wrote when I was 8. I grew up, and Frank Herbert didn't, and neither did Denis Villeneuve, and and neither did anyone involved with Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings or any of it. um I, I what I'm saying, like it's just
Yes, but
arbitrary,
it
and I
is.
watch
No,
it and I'm like, you
it's
mentioned like the Harkonnens. I see Jodorowsky. I've read
mm,
every
mm.
Jodorowsky comic. I see his fingerprints all over this, even though he didn't make his version of Dune. I mean, there's so many just shots and choices that I'm like, oh, this is Jodorowsky. This is Jodor. I mean, I'm watching a
Costume
$200
choices.
million Jodorowsky movie. I
Yeah.
see all the influences. I see all the failures of Jodorowsky to build a believable universe too. But like, why is this entire house so obsessed with like weird sex and incest and all this whatever, right? I mean, okay, but I'm watching it, but I'm like, right, I'm watching you move arbitrarily designated pieces who belong to arbitrarily designated houses along a board that means nothing. None of this means anything.
So you're not bought into any of the characters. You're not
No.
interested in.
I mean, I like the prophecy stuff. I love
Mm.
the prophecy stuff. I think it does really well. I think the Benny Jesuit, scheming and stuff, it does really well. I mean, I mildly like some of the characters, but I mean, most of them, are ciphers. I mean, even Paul is utter cipher. He's an utter cipher as a character. Um, the person I was with was like, well, he comes to believe in the prophecy. I'm like, well, not
No, he
really,
doesn't. No, he doesn't. Yeah,
you
no, he
know,
definitely
but
doesn't.
he gives that speech, right? And it's like, well, he doesn't afterwards say, you know, I mean, he doesn't afterwards say, oh, by the way, this is all bullshit, right? You have to kind of intuit that, right? That he hasn't changed, right? But
See, you have to enjoy. I just thought it was obvious. I thought it was clear as day that like this whole film to me, because the thing is, this is
right,
the film is an analogy. I follow the analogy or the of this film. The what they're trying to portray is this sort of thing of people devoting themselves to prophecy or to ideas.
yeah,
Being trapped by faith or being trapped by ideas,
hmm,
and he just takes advantage of that. Like
yeah,
at the beginning of
of
this film,
course.
he's looking for revenge honestly by going, I can build an alliance with the Fremen by
Hmm.
helping them, and then when it doesn't really pan out, he's like, fine, I will utilize this prophecy of being the Messiah
Well, I
to
think it
to
is panning
continue.
out. It's just, yeah,
But yeah, well, not in
this
the
would
way he
give me more
wants.
power,
This will give
right?
us me more power. This is the point.
Right.
It's like it's not going fast enough. Some things are happening, and it works in his favor. Like you say, Fade turning up and destroying um the Water of Life, whatever it is, the sort of the underground Fremen stronghold in the mountain or in that hillside. Um, gives him his sort of out to be like, right, this is moving too fast. They're not, you know, I've got to now change gear and buy it. Not so much. I don't buy into this prophecy stuff, but um I can use it to my advantage. I can now manipulate these people to form an army to take out the Harkonnens. That's all it is. Like he's the villain by the end of this, and anyone doesn't see that, I'm kind of
No, I
baffled by
agree.
that. Um,
Absolutely. Right.
if
No,
anyone that comes out this film going, well, that was a white savior narrative, is a fucking idiot. Is the only
well,
thing I'm going to
also,
take on that.
he has, I mean, so there's a lot that I love about Dune, right? I mean, I love the environmental themes. I love the
Mm.
Fremen and the Arabic influences. I mean, I love this idea of like I mean, it is a sort of like white guy entering a foreign
It
culture,
starts. It starts
but
as a white savior narrative, and then becomes something different. Like
yes, no, that's right. It subverts that, and
yeah,
ultimately he makes a decision. I love the I've always loved the the blue eyes and the
Mm.
child speaking in the where in the womb and like all this weird
Yeah.
shit. I love that stuff, man. But I love the sort of like spice awareness stuff and the kind of like revenge of the colonized run by him and the use of the Messiah narrative. I love this stuff. But I mean, let's be clear about him being a villain. He consciously makes a choice, really for revenge,
Yes.
to take a course of action that he knows his mother's behind, et cetera, et cetera. It's so easy to do, but it's going to lead to a billion people starving to death.
Yes. Well, he fights it. This is the thing. This is why I like this film. This is forget that you're right about, let's say, the macro chessboard of the houses and the Harkonnens and stuff is kind of like, I'm trying to sort of like see what you're saying to an extent, but like is what it is. But this is to me is the story of like the second part of this film is someone who's in a high fantasy adventure would be, the Princess Bride. My name is what's it,
Inigo
Inigo
Montoya.
Montoya, that kind of thing, like hunting down and finally getting revenge on the man that killed his dad, kind of thing, right?
Right.
That's what you'd be expecting, the honorable thing. And it starts in that way, where he's like, no, I will show them, I will learn their ways, and I will become one of them and fight alongside them. And it's all honorable. Like, he's trying to do that. And you see that he turns on his mum to say, like, what you are doing is disgusting. This is a fabrication.
Oh, yeah.
This prophecy you've made is a lie, and you are using these people. And she's sort of like, that, she's almost like, she's the opposite of Life of Brian, where that was like, he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy. Lady Jessica's like, he's not a naughty boy, he's the Messiah.
Right.
And so she's off doing a thing, like, so he's loving that. It's not until the end when he sees that this is like, they get driven out of the north into the south, and they've got no choice, that he's like, oh, we've got to step this up again. Like, this path
Right.
is no
Fate's
longer
taken the hand. I basically, yeah.
exactly. So and you're right, that could have been Beast,
Yeah.
it could have been a number of people, but like it, and I like the fact that like, this is Paul's decision, and so one of the things I like about this is actually, and this is why I'd say I praise Zendaya, the fact that throughout the film she's the same one going like, no, it's crap, like this religious
Yeah.
zealotry is crap, and even at the end of the film, she's even looking at him and going like, I know you're using this for this
Right.
purpose, but I still love you, and our goals still align. Please tell me that at the end of all this, once you've gotten what you've gotten, step down, kind of thing. It's that thing of like, I'll be a dictator until the benevolent dictator, isn't it? Like, I'll only be in charge until I'm not needed anymore, and then that never goes away. And there's a moment at the end of this when he says about the Holy War, about taking them to paradise, and it's sort of, there's a shot of her, and it's like in one
She's
shot,
dejected.
she's like this confusion, frustration, dejection, where she's like, shit. Like she's there's like a level of responsibility she feels, because she's like, I could have stopped this. Like,
she should have killed him.
Yeah, like she
Right.
saw
I mean,
this
ethically,
coming.
she had everybody who knew this had an obligation to kill him rather than allow this to happen.
Yes,
And as
exactly.
terrible as the Emperor is, and as terrible as all of it is, this is a universe-wide genocide, a galaxy-wide genocide that's about to happen.
They're about to start a genocide. Yeah, like a globe,
Yeah,
like an
that's
interstellar
right.
holy war. And so, there were people that I've seen people online that are like, "Oh my god, like, this is insane." I'm going like, "You clearly didn't read the book. Like, wait
Right.
till you see what's coming." But I thought they
Yeah.
played it really well, and it's that story that I'm really invested in.
Oh, and I love that stuff. I mean, I love that stuff too. I mean, and I'm fascinated by all that stuff. It's just this setting. It's just, that is so transparently window dressing. It's the lack of anything resembling characters as I understand them. You know, I mean, you're talking about like, like that relationship with Chani is like so delicately sketched. I mean, it's fine. I don't think it's terrible, but I mean, like, it's a few scenes of them like lying together and kind of not speaking direct. I mean, and then he goes off and does stuff. And then
But
stuff
it's what,
just happens, and stuff just
yeah.
happens, and stuff just happens.
This is where, and I think this is one of the things I thought was interesting about this film. I'll throw this out as a talking point is how this film, this story had to be adapted for the 21st century.
Mm.
And I think this film treads carefully around a number of things. The white man savior thing, I think, is one sort of thing. The fact that this is clearly, like you said, there's Arabic influences and they are a desert people, and sort of like, you have to be careful of stereotypes. I think they do actually do relatively well. I mean, I'm a white guy, so it hasn't,
Right.
hasn't offended my culture. I'm fine, but I am aware that, like, there are certain cultures where this is pulling from, and I think it does it relatively well. One of the things I was interested though is in the book and in interpretations in the past I've seen Chani is devout to Paul in a loving sense,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Right.
and at the end of the book, despite him choosing to go off with and marry Princess Urulan, like she's like, okay, well I'll be your concubine. I still support you throughout all this kind of thing. Like,
Right.
you're a bit like, and so there is that thing of being a devout, despite being a warrior and all this other stuff, like a devout, love interest. And I can see that they've throughout this, like they were like, we don't want to just
Yeah.
have her be, because obviously they have a child together in the book and stuff. And they're like, okay,
Mhm.
we don't want a pregnant Zendaya kicking about for 6 months or whatever. Like, we can't do that. So let's drop that because we want to contract the timelines as well. But like, there are certain things that, as you say, get taken out that actually their relationship always feels a little bit cold.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like,
I
there's
agree.
there's love there,
I
but
think all
like,
the relationships seem cold. I mean, and maybe that's just. I mean, Dune is a very cold universe, right? I
yes,
mean, it's a mean, cruel, Jodorowsky-esque cold universe, right? I mean, but at a certain point, right? I mean, I'm 6 hours into this fucking monstrosity and going like, why have I been watching this for 6 hours? I don't care about any of these characters. I don't know that there really are much of these characters, like, I
yeah,
mean,
no,
it
I know what you
becomes
mean.
irritating after a while.
I see where you're going, and I see it. So and I feel for some of the characters, and I think I carry in, because I'm carrying in knowledge and sort of the things of the
Mm-hmm.
story. Like, I think I carry some of that with me.
Mm-hmm.
Just what you were describing there, though. Just want to go back to talking about Paul and Chani as a relationship. There's a film. It literally just popped into my head. There's a film from 2001 called Enemy at the Gates. It's a World War II film
Mm-hmm.
about the Battle of Stalingrad and the
Mm-hmm.
stalemate between obviously the Russians and the Germans in this place. And there's these two snipers played by Jude Law and Joseph Fiennes sort of fighting off.
I've
But
seen it. Yeah.
a relationship builds, I think, between the Russian Joseph Fiennes plays and this woman played by Rachel Weisz, Tiana Cherenov. And there's a scene where they're sort of like they're in this place. It's been bombed. Like Stalingrad is flattened. There's barely anything left. It's cold. And this film's how long's this film? 2 hours and 11 minutes, right? So it's a short film. It doesn't have to cover as much, but there's a scene where they're surrounded by people and they're all camped down. They're all close together to be cold, and you get that this relationship has built up, and they end up having sex in this sort of within this confined little place. It's not graphic in any way, but it's shown to be like, their passions are there. They're in this thing of going like, we could fucking die tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, and it's kind of like,
Yeah.
it feels like that thing where you go like, in the worst place in the world, in this hell, there's these two people that found each other. And I've always remembered that scene, not for the sexiness of it by any stretch, because it's not, but for that thing, like it always sort of touched me in that kind of idea. And I feel like, I know this is June 2 is not going for that kind of thing. This is a PG or whatever, 12A. But I never feel like there's that kind of passion between them where they're like, we're going into
No, there's
battle
no.
tomorrow and we could die. Like, we are going up
No,
against an immense
that's a very
army.
good point because there is no relationship there.
Mm.
There is no love there. I mean, she sort of says like, they kiss,
Yeah.
I mean, and when they kiss, it's kind of like, well, everyone saw this coming, right? I mean, and it's not that they make any profession of love. There's no love that follows that. In fact, they're kind of look out for each other. Clearly, they care about each other.
It's almost
but
like
there's
brother and
no
sister. It's like
romanticism.
no, it feels like a
right.
sibling relationship rather than a
But
you know.
I'll go further and say, like, for all of the time that we spend with the Fremen, for all of this time and all of the politics and the Game of Thrones nonsense of going south and all that, and I like some of this is very well done. For all of that time, you never feel like their culture is threatened with extinction. You never feel like, oh, we're taking casualties from these attacks. Like, that was my brother. I mean, Star Trek 2 with Scotty's nephew or whatever does
Yeah.
a better job of that than this 3-hour movie about a culture, facing extinction. I mean, even when they lose the temple stuff, it's kind of like, oh, this is a big deal. And they kind of like gasp, and, you have a few shots of them kind of like sad. And then it's like, okay, golly gee, on to the south now.
What is there's a scene missing?
perfunctory.
Well, no, one of the things that this is missing, and this is actually interesting because it's something I felt with the first one, and I don't feel it's interesting because the books are there, and it's where I think this separates from. And I know you and I differ on Lord of the Rings and Pete Jackson's Lord of the Rings. I love those films, right? We don't do a fantasy
Well,
podcast.
this is much of my objection too. It's
Yeah.
just like there's no plot. It's a 15-minute movie across 9 hours.
Yeah, I love those 9 hours. Closer to 12. Anyway, I one of the things I feel that's different though between this and this until the end, right? I think the end battle of Dune 2 is actually really well staged. I think it looks great and there's a bunch of stuff. But both part 1 and part 2 is kind of bloodless.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not looking for like extreme gore, but there's certain things that I'm expecting, and this is where I differ with sort of, as I'd say, with Lord of the Rings. Is Lord of the Rings is actually not graphic, but you feel that when they have a battle, like it's dirty and people are getting hurt, and like horses are tumbling over each other and people are colliding and they're getting hit by weapons. Like you're like, oh, that's gonna leave a mark. Like you feel that. You're right. When there are things in this, it feels kind of bloodless. Like when that mountain is hit, when Fade hits that mountain, and all the mountains, and you see the people leaving when they sort of, the people are going to travel south. There's no one like, I've lost an arm, or I'm like, I'm all bandaged up and there's all this blood, or it doesn't feel like there's a triage or a hospital, or like we have to bury our dead, or, whatever. It's like, okay, or even, here's the
like,
dead.
this is our ancestral home. This is, I mean, like they burn the dead and you see them in the like catacombs or whatever, and but the point of it is, aren't I a badass sadomasochist bald villain, right? That's what it's setting up. The point isn't the extermination of this ancestral place, right?
Yeah,
that's there, but that's window dressing. Again, it's like, I mean, it's going through the motions of a plot, but these are arbitrary. It's like, this in terms of the signifier and the signified, right? Like the meaning of the signified is constantly stripped away, and it's not the worst movie ever. It's just and when you keep doing that, then it just becomes, a series of, little pieces being moved around the chessboard, right? Where it's like, this is the scene where the Fremen's home is destroyed, so they've got to go further south. And that's going to be emotional for them. So we're going to have, like a scene, but we're way more interested in really, a scene of them mourning or whatever, but we're going to get past that really quick. Like you said, that's that bloodless feeling that you've got, but we're going to devote a much more memorable scene to establishing the brother who structurally we don't need and how he's a sadist, which we already know.
But the thing is, I think there's two things to mention. I think the thing is about this thing of perfunctory, I think, is an element of it. But I think there's a couple of parts to that. I think it comes down to this, they're trying to be sensitive around certain things. They can't just show, I don't know. I'm being careful with the wording, but one of the things I find
like Islamic influenced, mourning and,
we can't be, have them all sort of like running out and weeping and scrapping. Like, we don't want to be sort of producing sort of stereotypes or whatever, but you want to have something. You need to have some feeling to it. The example I'll give, again, let's go back to Lord of the Rings, or even Star Wars for that matter, because I think Star Wars is a relatively bloodless universe, right? At least the original trilogy.
Absolutely.
However, I would counter like the Battle of Hoth.
Yeah. I
Right?
mean, that is, yeah. That was the first kind of like, okay, we're going to show you what a fight really is like.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Right.
That's the function.
But I think you and I have said it. I've talked about this. I think when we talked about it, one of the things we said was like, you got the guys in the trench and they look over and you got this massive AT-AT walkers coming towards
Yeah.
them, right? And because of the scale of everything, you're like, oh crap, this looks thingy. And you see people getting crushed underfoot. You know, you don't see the blood, but you're like, oh, even for a PG, even for a, whatever U or PG, like there's an element of like, oh, this is kind of doing damage. Like you feel it, right?
Mhm.
When they're underground, they're running around like there's panic. Like people are trying to leave the ice base as quickly as possible. They're under attack. Like you feel, you know, you see ships crashing. Blah blah blah. Right? It's a kids. No, I'll be careful. It's a safe universe, but they're trying to push things a little bit. And I think Empire Strikes
Right.
Back does that kind of thing a bit better. Right? Lord of the Rings, I think, goes bloodier. Like you see people get hurt, you see blood. There's consequences to injuries and all this other stuff, right? Still, there's still an element of the laser shooting, especially with the elves, where they're like arrow, 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 and there's like, you know, it's like a machine gun of arrows and stuff. Very
Mhm.
silly, but it's still there. But there's still that roughness to it all. But there's this thing into my head is like when you watch the fighting in both of those, even in the I'd say even in especially in Empire, the fight between Luke and Darth Vader, it's um it's rough.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not kung fu. It's not martial arts.
It's not carefully choreographed
it's
kind of
yeah, it's more
based.
medieval. You know,
Yeah.
they might as well be fighting with broadswords. Like, you know, they
Mhm.
are those lightsabers are incredibly sillily light, but they might as well be fighting with broadswords.
Right.
Big swings, you know, smashing things around them, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Same with Lord of the Rings. It's big, heavy, bludgeoning metal weapons, right? The thing that the problem, but so it feels like it should be damaging people. I think that one of the things I find with this is these are a guerrilla in Dune, for example, they are fighting guerrilla style, but they
Mhm.
have this like acrobatic fighting style that's like stomach slit, back slit, stab, da, da,
Yes.
da, da. And it's so balleretic or gymnastics kind of style that I'm like, this does not feel efficient and like it looks lovely, but I've
Right.
always had this
Yeah.
problem with like gymnastic style fighting in these sort of in all these new films where I'm like, this feels so impractical. It looks too choreographed. And it also
Right.
means you can move away. Someone's had this several times. Like they'll see someone like, you know, backslash and open someone's stomach or
Mhm. Right.
abdomen. The abdomen's getting sliced open. And I'm going, right, there should be blood all over this sand.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And you
Yeah. No,
never see
that's
it.
very true. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
But
that is very correct.
these people should be like the fighting style should be a lot more heavy and brutal and you know what I mean? This ballet style sort of feels so
Yeah.
incongruous and out of step with what these guerrilla fighters should be.
You know, one of the things that and I want to return to the combat later and share a grievance, but you know, one of the things I kept thinking about when you say a bloodless universe, one of the things I kept thinking about watching this movie, and you know, I often really find movie experiences, especially in the theaters, defined by like how much my mind wanders and thinks about ancillary issues,
Yeah,
right? It's just like,
yeah,
well, I'm clearly like I'm not in this movie at all. I mean, like there's 5 minutes where I'm like in the movie
yeah.
and sold, right? I mean, and that's just a fundamental problem. You know, like, and that's a problem I often have. Admittedly, I'm a thinker and over analyst and whatever, but I mean, it's beautiful, but I'm watching the composition of shots. I'm watching like what is the function of the scene. I'm never immersed in this universe. You know, I mean, I'm watching a painting come alive with arbitrary characters doing arbitrary things, but I'm not, you know, I'm not inhabiting this universe. And
Mm.
one of the things that I found myself constantly thinking about, you know, besides like the Jodorowsky aesthetic, right? Like it's this kind of like very Jodorowsky like, brilliantly designed. Everything is brilliantly designed, weirdly designed, very H.R. Geiger influences in here.
Yes.
You know, lots of Jodorowsky, worldview. But along with that is this very like H.R. Geiger has it, Jodorowsky has it, this very like artificial landscape, right? Like you think
Mm-hmm.
about those landscapes and they're very clean, they're very antiseptic. It feels as if humans are, and the humans are very clean. They're, extra
Yeah.
white. They're extra, they're in these fancy costumes. It's like there's no sense of just the daily human filth that actually humans mostly live in, right? Like humans are
Yes.
slightly more evolved versions of rats.
Yeah.
And, even humans who dress in business suits have messy bathrooms, you'd be surprised how dirty human beings are, right? So, it's this very like antiseptic, like computerized sort of AI kind of like clean, fascistic, you know, neutered version of reality, right? With that sort of leather spandex kind of, like
Mm-hmm.
appeal of the Harkonnens and stuff. But so to me, the lack of blood in these scenes, which you're entirely right about, is just part and parcel of this like entire lack of anything natural.
Yeah.
Outside of the beautiful shots of the desert, but the desert is oddly antiseptic too, right? I mean, like you don't see the sand in everything, right? Like you can't use equipment in the desert, right? The sand is going to get into all of it. I'm looking at that equipment just
Oh,
going
not
like,
just
I
equipment.
see a
Like
ridge.
it's in
All I
every
can think of is a practical problem with it.
yeah.
But
It's in
you know
every
what I'm saying?
crevice.
Like, yes, absolutely. I mean, there's this kind of like oddly antiseptic, sort of like fascistic, antiseptic, feel to it. And
Mm.
which is the opposite of like Lord of the Rings, right? Which like
Mm.
Lord of the Rings wants it to feel like it's in a forest or a swamp or whatever, right? And stuff. They go to pains to make sure those actors look dirty,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, I
I
have to
mean,
go for a shower after watching a film. I'm just like, I've only been sat there and I'm like, I feel dirty.
and kudos to
Mm.
Jackson for doing it. I mean, like that, I have to admit, they do that really well. Here, everything looks beautiful, and we will not let logic or life or, the nature get in the way. This is not a natural world.
Mm.
I mean, this is a living painting, of some sort. So to me, the blood is just part of that overall thing that I'm just
Yeah.
feeling, and I'm wondering what are the effects of. I like this aesthetic. I've always been kind of drawn to this aesthetic, but I wonder what are the psychological effects of this kind of aesthetic and presenting this to people, right? Of
Well,
cleanliness and perfection, and
okay. Let's play that out a little bit because in this film, you're right. I think the majority is that final battle kind of then introduces um an element of dirtiness. Like everyone's sort of been at battle, and there's a great scene of. And again, you talk about the beauty of this, like this how amazing this is. There's a scene at the end. You've got Raban is trying to get onto Dave Bautista, trying to get onto his ship to escape,
mm,
and then you get like the silhouette of um uh
do you,
Gurney,
oh, okay,
Josh Brolin sort of walking up, and he's like,
right.
"You killed my Duke," and he gets his revenge,
Mm,
and it's sort of a short battle. But the Gurney that walks up is like he's dirty, he's bloodied, and this other stuff, and it's like, "Oh, you've remembered to do it this time." Like it feels like it's like they've stored it up for the end of this film. Another film that this makes me think of and about this thing about dirt and grime and about things happening is the film Black Hawk Down, Ridley Scott's Black Hawk
mm,
Down,
mm-hmm.
which again is sort of is a Gulf War movie. A Black Hawk helicopter crashes. It's a true story,
We'll go for era,
dramatized.
right? It takes place
Yes,
in Somalia.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, sorry, yeah, Somalia. But that film is like all about that. Is about how sort of like the sand causes a
Right.
problem. Um, Dirt and sand and
The
sort of
streets are dirty, they're
the streets.
chaotic,
Yeah, there's rubble
like
everywhere. Like when things get
yeah,
blown up,
no
like
no military plan survives encounter of the
yeah,
enemy.
like
And
literally
that movie
everything
knows
keeps
that.
going wrong. Yeah, everything
Yeah.
keeps going wrong. And
Yeah.
like, like literally, there's a scene where they're trying to get Humvees to someone, and because of their artillery fire trying to give them cover, they blow up a street they can't get down anymore, and it's dirty
Hmm.
and frustrating and sweaty and horrible. It's a brilliant film, makes you feel uncomfortable.
Also
And
very racist, a very
oh,
uncomfortably racist movie. But
yeah,
okay,
agree. However, my point being is though, like
it's dirty.
you're in the action. Like it's one
Hmm.
of those action films. Like the action is visceral. And at no point does this film, to me, feel visceral.
Yes.
Where I'm like, even that revenge scene at the end when he finally takes down Batista, like or takes down Raban, you're a bit like, oh yeah, he's done it.
Right. Well, that's what I mean by the kind of perfunctory. It's like, oh, yes, I remember character X has now killed character Y.
Mm.
I don't really know, like, did we need character X in the movie? Like he comes back, they're reunited. That kind of is like, well, is he being pulled back to the, Arrakis kind of quote
Yeah,
unquote civilized world, like, okay, like, but outside of, I think, did we need him to come back? Did we need, like character X kills character Y? I'm not sure why either of these characters are in this movie. And it feels kind of perfunctory, like, okay, like you said, character X has just killed character Y. It's done aesthetically. I will say, like, how many shots do we get of somebody walking in slow motion in silhouette through a smoky landscape? A
yes,
dozen?
yeah,
I mean,
probably.
what the hell is happening? It's like the Winds of Dune cover or something, like just reproduced over and over and
How
again.
many album covers can we produce in one film? Now, what I want to say is that this is this is the other thought that sprang into my head. You talk about the action and stuff.
Mm.
I have um I have had things to say around Zack Snyder in the
Hmm.
past. And again, I think he produces very, very good looking films. Right? I think like you can take it most shots from his film and go, that looks cool. Right? His apart from maybe Rebel Moon, which I thought looked dreary as fuck, but but in his overuse of slow mo is obviously a real problem. But you can look, I even would defend Watchmen or any of his DCEU films. Like you can stop and go, that looks ace. Like it looks the part, right? Uh, um, but the thing I would say is he has a fascination with the tactile nature. Like again with
Mm.
Watchmen, like it's sort of like there's a heavy hitting sort of viscerality to a lot of his violence that's almost fetishistic. You know what I mean? Like he goes
Absolutely.
almost the other way.
Right.
And it's what's funny is I think, and I love Villeneuve. I think we both sort of enjoyed um Blade Runner.
Oh,
We both
he's
love
I mean,
24.
he's a master. I mean,
He is very,
sure.
very good. I mean, we'll talk about Arrival one day on the show,
Yeah.
definitely. Um, However, there is an element of me going, some of the criticisms that we could apply to
Yes.
Zack Snyder
Hmm.
could could be levied against Villeneuve and his Dune films.
Yes. I agree.
And
I
so
agree.
I need to be fair in doing that to say, almost the counter is to say, I think he made it incredibly pretty. This is a wonderfully beautiful film, as you say. However, where I will complain about the fetishistic nature of violence in a um, Zack Snyder movie that I find is almost cartoonish, where he thinks he's being taken seriously, I almost find
Hmm.
the other extreme is sort of is the coldness and the sort of sterile nature of the sort of and the
Hmm.
the ballerina level of sort of like gymnastics fighting styles and stuff in Dune is almost sort of cartoonish in another way.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree very much with that. I mean, and the other thing that Snyder has a problem with is his characters emote. You're saying like it's a much more tactile, messy,
mm.
bloody world. All right. Every injury squirts massive Tarantino like,
Yeah.
amounts of blood. In slow motion. Oh my.
Yeah.
Um Blood, I don't know about you, but I mean blood is a magical thing that slows down time.
It is.
You know.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's another similarity here, which is like, Snyder has his aesthetic, but the characters emote, but they kind of just like scream their motivation.
Yeah.
And then it's once they've screamed their motivation once, it never needs to be
We're,
referred
we're
to
done with that.
again.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because and now it's like, well, we've given you that. Now I can start maneuvering them on my little chessboard.
Mm.
Right? They want to kill person X. That's all you really need to know. I gave you the motivation in that one moment. What
Now
more do
let's
you
go
want?
do now go do all the fun stuff.
So even though that's very tactile and fast paced, there's a similar approach to character
Mm.
as there is in Villeneuve. At least in these two Dune movies. I mean, and even arguably in Blade Runner 2049. Um, although it doesn't bother me there as much. Because that has less plot to do. I mean, this has an awful lot of plot, but it's sound and fury signifying nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just I just become so aware of. Yeah, I mean, I know what these characters are and what they're doing, but you're just moving these pieces around. And I think you're right. I mean, I would throw in Michael Bay and say, I mean, Michael Bay does a better job of giving you character. His fight scenes are chaotic. The fight scenes here are chaotic in a different way.
Mm.
Um, and if we're going to be fair about these things, I mean, yes, Villeneuve has a more sophisticated aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
Villeneuve is the aesthetic of everything looks like it was designed by the Met, for
Yeah.
like the most fancy opera, except we're going to do it for science fantasy. Good on you. It looks amazing. Every shot looks so staggeringly good. But I don't know what it's for. I mean, I like the Messiah stuff. I like the other stuff. I take a step back and I'm like, right, like maybe David Lynch's version. David Lynch was right to do it in a much shorter time. And I don't know that I ever want to look. This is a 6-hour movie. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
think I ever want to watch this again. I mean, maybe in 10 years I'll want to go back and subject myself to this, and I'll just go like, oh man, that is beautiful to look at. But I mean, there's no nuance. There's no nuance that I'm missing after having seen it one time. Is there any reason to watch this again, except just to have a painting on in the background? I know I'm being really harsh here, but I mean, it's not a bad movie, but
No, I'm thinking. I am thinking. Like I'm wondering if, and one of the things that sort of springs to my mind, is influence and about certain times and the audience, right? So what I mean by that is because you've been saying what you've just been saying there. We've just talked about that comparison of like we've gone through. I would say we've gone through the superhero era, right? And I was thinking we're just talking about Star Wars, right? So journey with me, if you will. Each year, each decade has something that's going to sort of, I think, define it as a movie experience. That sort of like people sort of jump on the thing, and it usually happens quite early on. And I think Star Wars was that. Star Wars 77, but then you had like 1980 and 83, 82.
yeah, yeah,
And then
three, I think.
after that, every film, you've got a whole host of like Star Wars wannabes and the aesthetic of the dirty used sci-fi world is everywhere, right? So it
Hmm.
comes out of the 70s, and I'd even say that, the aesthetic of Star Wars in 77 influenced the ship, the Nostromo of Alien, right? You got
Of
all that,
course,
right?
absolutely.
That
Yeah,
sort of 70s, you and I
that
have called
yeah, just taking it
industrial
one step
sci-fi look.
further. Yeah,
Yeah, the industrial sci-fi look, right? Star Wars
right.
was that for the 80s. I think the 90s, sci-fi wise, I don't think there's not like an official sort of trilogy that I can think of, really, that defines anything. But it's kind of like a younger action. Like there's the sci-fi side, it's more like Terminator 2, Total
Mm.
Recall. There's
Hmm.
those couple of films that come out in like 1990, 1991 that define the rest of the decade, like from a science fiction point of view, let's say genre point of view.
Slick, violent, right? I
Yes.
mean, you could argue like if yeah, I mean the violence, stylistic violence, some idea, right? There's always some big idea for the
Yeah.
plot, whether it's daft or not. But there's like one big idea that you hang a spectacle of violence on, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
big there's a big payoff scene, and there's a couple of others and that sort of thing, right? And that seems to be the notion throughout the 90s, and you can follow it through. I would say we get double whammy in for the 2000s. You have The Matrix,
Uh-huh.
which
91.
clearly defined a look and
Yeah.
a genre for a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other part of that is the epicness of Lord of the Rings. I think a lot of other people were looking at that and could never replicate it, but Peter Jackson lived off it for fucking years, made The Hobbit, got greenlit, made King Kong. So I think those films greenlit the ability to have excessively long films. They were like, oh, we can
Yeah.
do 3 hour plus and everyone will go see it. Bonus. We're up
Well,
to
and
that.
also multi-film before
Stories.
Marvel, multi-film ambitions.
Exactly.
Right? Plot things out over multiple.
Which clearly was obviously influenced the two Matrix sequels as well.
Mm-hmm.
Back to back filming and all that sort of thing.
That had been done before, right? Like Back to the Future.
Back to the Future is a good example.
But,
yes.
Yeah.
But it really sort of gave it that's the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you say, like the next decade is defined by the Marvel, sort of like phase one of the Marvel films.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, you get the plethora of all kinds of not just Marvel,
Shared
but DC,
universes,
shared universes, and so on
dumb
and so
characters that are flashy that we can put on a poster. And
exactly, sell loads of toys.
Yeah.
It's not the actor, it's the character kind of aesthetic, right? That's what you're now working on. I think we're now in. I think we've now just had Dune 1 and Dune Part 2 has done it. We are now in the next stage. This is it.
Which is what, like utter.
I think this could be good and bad. I do. I think we're now going to be entering. Superheroes are done. We're already seeing the waning.
Mm-hmm.
I think we are going to see auteur adaptations and sci-fi and genre pictures that are a little bit that allude to being more politically or let's say, woke in their messaging and sensitivity towards cultures and all this other kind of stuff, but trying to tackle big ideas. And I think you're going to see. I think we'll see this coming through, and you'll see other sort of weird films being greenlit. I think we're there. I think this is it now. I don't know what your thoughts on that. It's just as we've been describing this, I'm like, I think the Dune series is gonna because we're getting Dune Messiah. Let's not kid ourselves. Dune Messiah is coming.
Yeah, he'll probably do something in between the two just so he can cleanse his palate. But
yeah. Well, he'll have time because they're going off to do a Bene Gesserit,
the Sisterhood
spin-off film TV series. I'm unsure.
TV series,
right? But
supposedly later this year.
Yeah. So this aesthetic that you were describing, this Jodorowsky, like it's clearly been used. I think that is the aesthetic that we are now going to see emulated for the next 8 to 10 years. The 2020s is this in some fashion.
I think that I don't know about that. I mean, I think that there will be things that imitate that aesthetic. That's fine. I mean, I'm looking over and I have a book of H.R. Geiger art on my shelf. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I like this stuff. I mean, and I think about all the art produced for Jodorowsky's Dune that never got made. That's beautiful, and you see all this stuff. I mean, even the Geiger did some stuff for Masters of the Universe. It's amazing. You're like, oh wow, there's a movie there. But yeah, I mean, some of it is the aesthetic. I certainly think that in general, again, this isn't a bad movie, but I certainly think that in general, I'm in favor of the auteur stuff, right? And I love Villeneuve. I don't know how anyone doesn't see anything Villeneuve does. It's beautiful. Having a focus on the aesthetic is right up my alley. I am a very aesthetic person, but I am troubled by, the continuation in Villeneuve of what became very common in Marvel of just, okay, this is person X. They have powers Y now. Why do you care? Well, you have no reason to, except, we gave them a quip or something, get it? They're the young girl character. They're the quippy, arrogant boy character. I mean, that's, and now we're gonna give them powers Y, and they're gonna have to fight villain, A, and A and B, and it's all sort of paint by numbers. And I feel like the underlying structure of Dune is paint by numbers. Superficially, it is a auteur film that is filled with, every shot is a painting, it's designed within an inch of his life. Massive admiration for making these unfilmable movies and, making them blockbusters. I hope we get a lot more auteur sci-fi as a result. But I do see these continuation of this kind of, like, the thing you're talking about with Snyder, the thing of this sort of paint by numbers version of plot and character.
That's okay. I think they're two different things. I think you're right to it, but I'm wondering, is that not always been the case? Like, watch Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I'm not
but I
just
mean, I
picking
think
at
I give Star Wars a bad review. I mean,
yeah.
partly Star
But
Wars
my-
is a
but my
problem
point
for
is,
that.
I think what we're looking at is we are looking at blockbuster cinema. It's always been the case of blockbuster cinema. Like, films I love, the circumstance that drives certain things. Like, I'd even look. Back to the Future. I love Back to the Future 1. I think Back to the Future 1 is a fantastic film. It's a film I grew up with. It's
Sure.
it's definitely in my sort of top 10. Probably for more nostalgia reasons, not other stuff. However, I will acknowledge everything that you're saying. Back to the Future Part 2 is totally guilty of. Where they're like,
Yeah.
we're going to introduce MacGuffin, and then we're going to because we're going to go to the future, so we can do these other bits, and now we're going to do this, and because it's cool, we're now going to go replay the scenes from Part 1 from a different angle, and we're going to do this. It's all,
but some of that works, though. I mean,
it does. I'm not saying it's all bad, but I'm saying
and underlines character, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is this way that like characters vary. Back to the Future is all about character. I mean, like,
the first
the
one,
plot
100%.
is, but I mean,
Yeah.
like, even the plot is, it's just like they will elide basic shit in the plot just to get to that next character moment, right? Which is how it works. I mean,
But also, I would say, and this is I think why, and I will, I will cross myself now for saying this, so prepare yourself. No, but one of my most favorite, at least initial trilogies, suffers from this without a doubt, and I know you already think this. Indiana Jones is exactly this.
Yeah, sure.
It's literally set piece, set piece, set piece, set piece, set piece. How can we get from this to this, this? Like the literal, there is a literal argument for Raiders of the Lost Ark that take Indiana Jones out of the story, and you get the same consequence.
Yeah.
Nothing changes. And you go, okay, so he's superfluous to the plot. Yeah, kinda, but you're not there for that. You're there for the spectacle of doing these things. What I would say is that these are Spielberg films, and so I do enjoy I love the characters, and I get on the ride and that sort of thing. With all of with at least the first three, but I think what you're saying is almost like the evolution of this problem that has been happening for decades, or this approach to blockbuster cinema that's been happening for decades. Bond films are the same. Bond is barely a character, but he'll take you through. Yeah.
I mean, it depends, but no, I agree. I mean, I just think it's gotten worse.
Yeah, I agree. I'd agree with that.
And I do think that even where, like, we've talked about, like, what a truly awful movie Goonies is. Just a truly awful movie. But I mean, unwatchable. But
I still love it. No, I know it has massive problems.
I mean,
but
totally illogical, stupid, beyond belief. But
hugely,
it's so focused on those character moments, and I think that that's part of what they did in the '80s. Was I would say an over focus on character over plot, right? And it was like, look, there's no plot hole that we cannot elide with a close up of a charming kid, right? It's just like you won't care what's that was just the 80s, right? We can do a close up and have somebody be charming, and nobody's going to care that a mannequin came alive.
We'll have a funny musical cue, an outrageous gay character, and and we'll move on.
Yeah,
that's all we need.
And it kind of works, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and even though as an adult you see right through it, right? It still is charming, right? And I think that, but it's this sort of like paint by number, it's like I remember, and maybe I am just a old curmudgeon, but I remember it was during the Secret Invasion crossover in Marvel, where there was a discussion of killing a character, and apparently at the writers' retreat where they were plotting this out, they decided to kill a character. I think it was around this. I might be wrong. They decide to kill a character, and the reaction of the retreat is, dude, if you do that, that's like killing Elektra. Like you're gonna be immortal forever. And so they just like killed this character in the most unsatisfactory, just rote, boring way. And it's like, have you forgotten the reason why killing Elektra mattered is there was a year-long plot that preceded that of will they, won't they, and of unrequited love and not being able, love versus duty, etc., etc. And that she dies on the steps, and it's like, nah, none of that matters, right? Because we're pushing that button of this is that narrative, plot X, event X happens to character Y. That's good enough. And that's what I feel with Snyder. It's what I feel with this.
Yeah, it's that. Funnily enough, from a sort of a visual point of view, it's the panel, isn't it? This is where you want the panel of Daredevil holding Elektra, or like with the I'm trying to think of other murders of Batman holding Jason Todd, or
his parents' death,
or his parents' death, or then later on they do it again, like when Captain America was killed, like Sharon Carter sort of holding the body of Captain America on the steps.
Yeah, and that's a death that works for the most part.
Yeah. So there's those things. That's what you want. You want that iconic panel. That's what you're looking at. So it shocked everyone. And I think there's an element of that in these films, that you want that iconic moment or that scene or that shot that people are looking for. So I understand that. One thing I think that's interesting though from what you're saying,
but it's also about emotional investment, right? It's also it's not just the shot, it's about the character or the plot that is winds up in that moment, right?
Yes. No, yeah, but this is what the one thing I was going to get to, and I agree. I agree with you. And I often think about this actually, and I don't really write fiction, but I think about this when I watch things. And it's weird that it comes from these two people, but the two guys that write and do South Park have this idea. Trey Parker and unfortunately I forget the other guys. Matt Stone, thank you. When they do a plot, they like, we can't use the word and or the phrase and then. So that should never be, this happens and then this happens and then this happens. It should never be that. It should be this happens and because of that, this then happens. Like it should always move on. This happened because of this. This happened because almost backwards. Like you should be able to track back through the actions. And I do agree that we got into a point of blockbuster, and I do find this with sort of like with some of the Marvel films, but also there are elements of Dune, and you're talking about Fade being introduced and replacing Beast Raban is exactly that. Is a case of and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And it's like there's a very thin that happened because of this.
Yeah. I mean, at least there you could kind of say, well, that happened because of what was going on with the Fremen, right? It's all,
Yeah, but it's still more of an and.
But,
it's still an and then this happened.
No, right.
Not because you say
because. And then the Baron Harkonnen decided to do this. And then, I mean.
Because there's, like you said, there's no reason, there's no difference apart from their Satan, but there's no difference in approach between Beast Raban and Fade Ratha. Like they don't go, we have to unleash Fade Ratha on
Right.
the Fremen. Like, do you know what I
Because
mean?
his predecessor was known for his kindness,
Yeah, exactly.
has been trying to win the Fremen's hearts and minds.
Yeah,
Well, that era is over. Like, oh, really? They're
exactly.
both
Like it's an and.
monsters.
It's very much an and, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah, but they're
da da
monsters
da,
with
and
different
then they swap places.
aesthetics.
Yeah,
It's that aesthetic that matters. It's not, I mean, nothing else matters. I mean, I feel like it's like cardboard characters processing through like a game of Clue. You
mm,
know, it's just Arrakis instead of a mansion.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, and I even feel like it's curious to me. Yeah, I like what you're saying. It is curious to me. I really want to point out that there are other things that don't make sense in this movie and that just are not told well.
Mm.
Um, one of the worst sequences in this movie is when they first start to fight back, and you have Paul and Shawnee is working that rocket launcher.
Mm.
And they're at the like feet of this spider machine, mining machine. Okay, we don't know it's a mining machine. I know it's a mining machine, but the movie doesn't know it's a mining machine. It does not tell you it's a mining machine. It's just a spider thing with big, feet, right?
Oh, I did. Yeah. Okay. Well, I knew it was a monument. I just assumed everyone. It's collecting spice. That was just what it was
I
doing.
mean, I guess, but it's not clear. Nobody. I mean, I don't think at any point they say that's the spice collector mining machine.
No, they
You
do.
know?
Yeah, yeah. When it comes
Do
in,
they?
yeah,
Okay. All
harvesting,
right.
harvest.
Well, there's
They
a
don't call
line
it
of
mining.
dialogue.
They
Well,
call it
harvesting.
harvesting. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I don't know how that happens, but okay, so then they strike this, and you need this like first Fremen raid, right, where they're starting to fight back, using Paul. Okay, and we spend about 5-6 minutes with Paul and Shawnee hiding by the giant metal fingers of this, spider machine.
Mm-hmm.
As she's using a rocket launcher, and he's got to. Who she still needs to hear the man say fire, right? Even though there's like the obligatory knocking people on the head, like make sure the woman has something to do. There's still these tropes of male dominant action. So he's got to run off, and there's a couple guards on the ground, and he's got to knife them, and then come back and say fire now, and and then ornithopter. And the ornithopter opens fire multiple times, and they have to hide, and then the feet is moving. All this happens, right? And finally, a shot gets through and blows up the ornithopter.
Mm-hmm.
Not clear how that happens. My guess is that Paul has distracted them and somehow got to them to focus on a different area, and that's what helps the missile go through the second time.
Yeah, he
Or else
explains
their
that.
shields are just depleted.
No, no, no. He explains it.
I
He
don't
does
find
it.
it clear at all.
He does explain it.
I don't find that clear.
Oh, okay. Well, he does because when they're firing, they fire the first time and it just bounces off, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
and they actually say the only time that the shields are down is when they are firing at us. It's like they.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so
Yeah,
he's
no,
like, "Well, I'll
yeah,
distract them
okay.
so they're opening fire, and you fire at that point."
I kind of get that. Okay, so I still don't think, I think there are lots of problems with just how this is told, right?
Mm.
Already with the scene, it goes on a long time. We're spending a lot of time on this rocket launcher scene, and it doesn't feel like a grisly tactile combat scene like you're
No.
describing. It feels kind of stagey and weird. Okay, so I accept what you're saying. They get through the shields, right? Big deal. We have seen the main characters do their thing X, which we need them to do for this scene, right? And instantly, as soon as that's done, the Fremen pull out their laser weapons, which with one blast chops through anything it aims at.
Yeah.
Why did you not do this earlier?
That bothers me.
Where did you get these laser weapons?
Yeah.
If you've had these, haven't you been decimating the Harkonnens until now? Like, can these laser weapons chop through the ornithopters? Or like, why did we go through this? Like, are there not shields on these mining spider things? Like, none of this makes any sense. But except if you say we're watching cardboard characters walk through
those laser
nonsense,
weapons,
right?
because that do shoot through the harvesters. I actually agree with you. I literally thought like I've blinked and missed something because I'm like it seemed like you say they come out the sand and they attack all the people surrounding the harvester,
Mhm.
this other stuff, and then all of a sudden they're using these laser weapons. I'm like, why did you hide in the sand? Like that seems
Why
like
did you attack?
yeah.
On
What
foot? It's
did you?
just
Why
like,
did you? You've just put yourself in harm's way for no
okay,
purpose. Like
but you know the purpose. The purpose is to show Paul and
yes,
Shawnee in action. That's all that
but
matters
but
because they're
again,
cardboard characters. But we need that scene that makes them do X.
but
That's
here's
why
the
this
thing.
is the
But yeah,
structure is a Marvel movie.
yes, I
It
agree.
looks
Yeah,
like a French science fiction masterpiece, but the deep structure is a
yeah.
Marvel movie.
But here's the thing. Like I say, because again, we often do this. Literally, make
That's such an asshole.
but make no,
Like,
that mission, or that interaction between Shani and Paul, have it be to get the laser weapon.
yes, yes, you're right. There are solutions to this. Right.
Where they're
Yeah.
like, oh, if we bring that thing down, we can get their weapons and use them against them. And that should be the big get that they're like, oh, we
Mm.
shot down this ornithopter and actually we've now got this laser weapon, or we've got several of these laser weapons or whatever. Like, if it's an easy fix.
Yeah. Right. Right. But they don't care to fix that, right? Because the plot doesn't matter. The plot is window dressing for some ideas,
Yeah, yeah.
but I mean, like it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, and this is what I mean by like when you start thinking about it, there are answers to every question, but the answer is like you said, lore, right? It's that kind of like, well, there's a lore answer to every question. Does that question really make sense, or does it prompt another question?
Yeah.
To me, it prompts another question, and the answer to that is lore. So I was saying to my friend who saw it with me, who's not, she saw part one, but she doesn't read the book. She's not a science fiction devotee. She had a ton of questions about this. She liked the movie, but she had a ton of questions about it. And I'm like, well, I can tell you the answers to all these questions. None of the answers will be satisfactory.
Yeah.
Like that's just the way this world works, is really just the answer to everything. And the ultimate, like, I love the ending with like, it's a very downward, you're right. Anyone who thinks this is a happy ending has missed the movie, right?
Yeah.
I love that it's a downbeat ending. Johnny's dejected, he's a political animal. He's launching a holy war that's going to kill billions. This is, a very sad ending. He's a tyrant. He's a monster. And all of it, anyway, isn't really his accomplishment. It's just a Bene Gesserit plan within plans. And it's just a war between one sister and another. And they're alternate plans, versions of the plan. Okay, that's really cool to pull off, especially in a blockbuster movie. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
I'm all with you. Why do they have to destroy House Atreides? Because his dad stopped listening to their orders.
The Emperor.
Yeah, no. The remember they're like, well, we had to. The whole thing is triggered by sending the Harkonnen in to demolish House Atreides, right? Even though they've spent like a millennia trying to cultivate the Messiah in the House Atreides bloodline, right? Of which Paul is.
Oh, okay. So, well, it's two things. So, again, it's law. It is. This comes into law.
This is what I mean. All right.
So, yeah, it is in the first film, but
an important question. This is the secret machinations behind the whole thing, right?
So,
So
the thing is, so it's twofold. So the Bene Gesserit sort of line up the Emperor to believe that the House Atreides is a threat to the throne because they are they are a natural leader household. Like, Duke Leto Atreides is a natural leader. He's loved by all the other houses, apart from maybe the Harkonnens, but he is a natural successor to the Emperor. Like, he's a threat. He may have more power or more influence over the houses than the Emperor. So he's a threat. And that's what the Bene Gesserit promote. But one of the things they're upset about is that Lady Jessica, who has been for over years of different breeding and all this other stuff, which we find out in the second film, is she's actually the daughter of Baron Harkonnen. So they've introduced genetics from the Harkonnens as well as the Atreides and all this other stuff. She was supposed to have a daughter because they can genetically manipulate what their child will be. And so she was supposed to have a daughter that would continue this plan and this sort of things. And then the next generation would have the Messiah.
Right.
The not Muad, what they call him? Whatever they
Quasar
call.
Sadrak.
Yeah, yes, the
Quasar Sadrak.
Kazak, yeah. That was supposed to be the next generation or whatever. But she
Mhm.
chose to have a son, so she has betrayed the prophecy, and then she utilizes that against it to her own ends with
Right.
Paul to bring him to power. But what we find is because she has then so that's why they bring down Atreides. That's the whole point of bringing down the House of Atreides, as far as I understand it. Like I might be miles off, but
Right.
that's my understanding.
Okay, so why did they have to? So I know they've tricked the emperor, right? Which again, it's as
Yes,
easy as we've had a vision. Like, trust me, in the future, your empire will fall unless you do this. That's all they really need to say, right? Again,
yeah,
a signifier without a signified. But okay, so I get that. Why do they need to annihilate the? They say explicitly the goal was to annihilate the Atreides bloodline, presumably because this long experiment has gone awry, and they say, well,
yes,
they were getting too uppity, right? They
yes.
were like resisting. Okay, right? Yeah,
But
okay.
but
I mean, it's one of the major houses,
yeah.
but that Duke, Paul's father, just stopped listening to orders after 1,000 years or some
No,
shit.
he hasn't. It's not him. Nothing to do. It's
Now,
nothing to do with Duke Leto. Like the thing is, like Leto, played Oscar Isaacs.
uh
He's not the problem. Like he's still towing the line. That's the
the problem
thing.
is Jessica.
It's Jessica who is the problem, and it's the Bene Gesserit that keeps saying it's not Duke Leto, it's Paul. So
So
if you
why
watch the
is?
first film, they're like,
Oh yeah,
they say to him, "There's a vision." Paul is the
yeah.
thing that's going to bring down, but unfortunately, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because by doing what
Right.
he does, he brings about the fall of his
Why did they?
emperorship.
But why is the solution to this to annihilate an entire house, which obviously is going to an entire
Because it's
bloodline?
a medieval fantasy.
This is what I mean. Like, it does not make sense. I
No,
mean, it's like it makes sense within its own circular medieval
law.
terms,
Yeah,
but if you poke at anything, the answer is more lore that doesn't really
100%.
make.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you need to accept the world in which this film exists or which
there's
this
no
story
world to
exists.
accept.
Well, there is.
There's a
There's the
there's
world
a
of
paper
Dune.
play set sold at fucking McDonald's, with a Happy
All right,
Meal that has is
but
as
then
deep as this.
that's but let's say that goes for the same as the book, isn't it? Like you have to accept not
Yeah,
just the film but the book as well. Like the book does it on the same terms. Like you have to
yeah.
accept the same. You have to accept the same thing, in the same way to appreciate the book. But I would say this goes for, and I'm looking at my shelf, so I was looking at this and thinking, like, how else, where else does this apply? And I think we've said about sort of like Lord of the Rings. You need to accept this whole thing for like why the elves do what they're doing and why there is, bad blood between this sect and that sect and the people of the Rohirrim versus the people of Gondor. You have to accept all that stuff that's gone on. You have to accept all that. Like this, just is the way this world works. And then from a science fiction or say sci-fi fantasy point of view, it's exactly the same. I mean, I'm looking at um actually I haven't got that many to be honest. I can't think of many, but like I do think about like other fantasy. I don't read much fantasy, so I literally then went to like, well, what about this? What about that? But I can't think of much more. Like Conan is just Conan existing in his world, or the Terry
Right.
Pratchett Discworld
I mean,
is
that's part
much
of
more
why
sort of
Conan doesn't work, is it's just, look, you're either sold by the adventure story,
yeah.
but you can't press too hard on Conan because it's just an arbitrary world with
He's a pulp.
arbitrary tribes
Yeah,
doing arbitrary things, right?
well, that's
I
why
mean,
that's why to me Conan works as on paper because he's a pulp adventure series, much like every other pulp
yeah,
adventure series. Is every story is relatively they sort of have a very vague continuity, but they're designed to be an adventure story. Like, don't get into the lore. It's almost like don't ignore that. Like, just like Doc Savage or The Shadow or any of the others. Like, ignore that bit. That's just that happens in another story. This is what we're talking about now, and they live in that vague world. But I think once you start to create a concrete lore or a concrete world, you have to be careful. But I think one of the things that this Dune world does better than I'd say than other films that have tried to do or film series that have tried to do a similar thing is this film openly acknowledges that you cannot trust the law because it's probably false.
What in terms of the Bene Gesserit and
Yeah,
the
exactly.
prophecy
We
and stuff?
know
Yeah,
we know what we've been told as to why. So there are even as like there are different levels. Like, oh, the Emperor is worried about the Atreides, so he takes them on and has this political plan to have them destroyed by the
right.
Harkonnen. But behind that, we're going. But we also know there's this other story about the Bene Gesserit and this other thing and da da da. And you even see Lady Jessica like
Yeah,
fabricating prophecy and law and all this other thing as she goes throughout the South. So at least with the Dune universe, like, it openly acknowledges like half of
yeah.
this is utter bullshit.
No, and Dune has, the ecological stuff. It has I think it has a lot to say about, prophecy and religion and all the stuff. And I love that
Mm,
this part two got into all that stuff. I guess, the problem is if you're not being given a reason to care,
yeah.
and like when the answer is why are they doing that? Well, see, this character wants to bring down that other house. And you're like, okay, well, why do they want that? Well, the houses are always at war, and plus, like so and so happened in it. Where it's like talking to somebody about Game of Thrones, and you're just like, why should I care? Like, why do you expect anyone to care about any of this? Like, or it's like somebody explaining Warhammer, right? Like,
Oof.
I
Yeah.
respect Warhammer, right? But we've talked to like, or it's just like, oh, because of this, and then
Yeah.
there's lore out the ass there,
Oh
right?
yeah.
But
Yeah.
to an outsider, you're like, why? What is the in for any of this,
Well,
right?
it's
Like,
the same.
why do I
Let's
care about any of
okay.
this?
Let's talk about this as a franchise from a franchise. One of the things I think once you get to these lore kind of films, often they start with a an intro monologue, some sort of like and this is no different. Like the second one does, but the first one does.
Hmm.
Like the first film, in '84, it had
Mm,
Princess Irulan given the sort of like, here's the
yeah,
context of the world you need to
right,
know, because I'm a historian. Never gets brought up again in the film at all, by the way. But
yeah.
and it's the same with this one. You got, I think Zendaya sort of like gives this sort of monologue at the opening of the first
Oh,
film,
that's
saying like,
right. Yeah, that's
this is a
so painful.
this is Arrakis, and this is a house that this is
Yeah,
the thing of spice and da da. How beautiful it is in the sunlight and da 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 da. But then that you need that in there's almost like you need to
yeah.
come to these worlds with pre-knowledge. Another example of a film I love, and I think you love it as well, is Dread. You say about what's the in. Dread has to have a similar thing because you're entering a world where it's sort of like welcome to the mega cities, towering mega blocks do this, blah 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 blah. Here's what you need to know, police corruption and da da da. The only way to stop it are the judges, and you go right, cool, that's it. Like you have to know this pre-knowledge to enjoy this world. What's the in? Well, the problem is with a lot of these things, Dune, Lord of the Rings, Dread, Marvel comics, DC comics. You've said this before. I think we've talked about this. You either have to go, where does this start? And you try and plow through everything, which is an insane impossibility, or you just run at it and bomb your way in and go, I'll pick it up. I won't know everything. I don't need to know everything. I will pick it up as it goes. And if I don't know something,
Right.
I'm going to have to research it. I
I'm
kind
okay
of
with
think,
that.
yeah, I
I
know.
mean,
But I think that's part and parcel of this kind of sci-fi fantasy. You just have to jump in and go. I'll
yeah,
pick
but
it up.
again, that's not world building.
No, it's not.
Again, that's
But
something very hostile to the concept of, building a fictive world to me. It's like the difference between detail versus depth,
mhm.
right? I mean, it's like, X-Men continuity, famously detailed, doesn't mean that it's consistent or there's a lot of depth
Yeah,
there, right? I mean, this is a world that is tremendously detailed, but I don't, there's certainly a lot of depth compared to Star Wars and other stuff about religion and all this stuff,
mm.
but most of the plot does not have a lot of depth to it. I mean, it's just this house wants to fight that house, and it's the red team versus the blue team. It's space lasers, and I mean, that's still what it is.
Yeah.
Um, it's just a lot of window dressing on that fundamental concept, and I think that what occurred to me as you were talking is, and I remembered I was fine with that opening sequence in part one. I
Mm.
liked the first half hour or 20 minutes of part one. But what occurred to me is Villeneuve and these films are visually very poetic. They look like they were designed for an opera company, but they're lacking any poetry of scene.
Yes.
Like,
Okay.
you know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Mm-hmm.
like perfunctory scenes and plot elements and whatnot, but there isn't a kind of like I'm fine with a mysterious plot that kind of like dovetails and goes different directions as long as I feel something in that scene. As
Yeah.
long as I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. What's going on here? Like, oh, that's like you could spend 10 minutes on some weird Fremen custom and just have this little short story in the middle of your movie, right? There are ways to signal that you're doing that. This doesn't really do that. It offers these weird kind of like Zack Snyder-esque minute long 2 minute scenes that really make you wonder more about how does this work instead of less. um I don't know. There is a poetry that's missing for all the visual poetry. It
Mm.
seems there isn't a lot of poetry of character or story.
No, I see what you're saying. I can see what you're saying, but there is in the book to an extent,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah,
where I
that's true.
think, and that sort of thing, I think, is where sort of the translation or adaptation starts to, they've gone for the visuals and they've gone for the story arcs, the story milestones. That this happens and then this happens and then this happens. But like you
Hmm.
say, that the poetry of it is kind of lost. And one of the things I think that they contract the timeline for the film.
Hmm.
In the book, I think is it 2 years, maybe more. I can't remember. And the Shani and Paul have and lose a child in that time,
Yeah.
and there's other events that go on along with sort of the Fremen and there's other things that goes on with Lady Jessica and stuff like that. So there's an element of that poetry then of sort of like time passing and it having a sort of like being under siege almost on a daily basis, having a sort of a wearing effect, and that so that is kind of lost. Um, so yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Um, there's a trope.
You're
There's a
kind of saying like this needs to be a mini series, like this needs more time or less.
Yeah.
Like that's what you're arguing for me.
Well,
But
I
like
almost think
five and
like
a half hours is the wrong runtime.
yeah, I almost think like I'd have done the Lord of the Rings thing and gone. I'd have done a third film and had
Mm,
like a middle act and gone, okay, well, how can I separate and have that 2 year time gap and explore that in a much more interesting way. Maybe you do that and actually have a film that sort of be much more adventurous. You like Dune Part Two is literally the second act, and
mm,
then Dune Part
mhm,
Three will be the third act. I don't know. There's ways of doing it. Um, and I just think that work structurally could have worked better. You could have focused on characters. There's a trope I love in films that I think does this, and it's sort of like the non sequitur story that a character sometimes tells.
mhm.
And one of my favorite, it happens. It's usually like an old man, like a mentor character, sort of like sat smoking or eating, and sort of like the mentee comes up and sort of like he'd be like, "I'll
Is
tell
it
you."
is it is it a story that then is indicative of the plot and how you're
Yeah,
supposed
it's
to
sort of
take
like
it
it's
and
a
what
bit of
it
a
means?
non sequitur,
Right.
when I was a
In its
boy, and in
context.
his context, it's sort of like he'll
Right.
have something about how like his bike was
Mm,
stolen or some of the random shit
mhm,
going on, and but you're like, oh, but this seems, but when you take it, you're like, oh, this is actually a piece of advice, or it's interesting. He'll take
mhm,
something from it that will then influence the plot later on or his actions later on.
mhm.
I kind of like those because there is a poetry in those where you do sort of get lost a little bit, and you sort of, and sometimes they're a bit silly. Like one of my favorite versions of this is actually in The Exorcist 3, where yeah,
That was not what anyone listening to
no,
this expected you to say.
where you sort of get a character and you sort of like why you're trying to explain basically why he is so dedicated to this case. Like, why is he always on? Why are you always out doing this case? And you sort of think he's going to say about how it's sort of like um it's close to him. It means a lot. It's a spiritual thing about why he's investigating these murders that are linked with this church. What you actually find out is that his sister-in-law's over, and she's brought us a trout, and it's living in his bathtub. And so it's this weird sort of story about how like he's like, I can't go home.
Right.
So what? I'm going to investigate this crime. That's what I'm not. It's sort of like it sort of pulls that rug a little bit when you're like, oh, he's not emotionally invested in this thing. Actually, he's doing it because he's got bugger all else to do, and it's
Yeah.
sort of, you know, but then by the end of the film, you see that actually the reverse is the case. So it sets him up as being like, so he has this whole non sequitur about how he hates that he can't go in because this fish is living in his bathtub. And I kind of love those things. And June could have done with that because everything feels very, to say, sort of thingy. But even like a personal moment between some other characters, they kind of do it with Shani a little bit, but she's not mentor enough. Like she's not old enough to have that sort of like secret wisdom. It should have
Right,
had a
right,
scene
right.
with like Stilgar or even sort of
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
somebody else to sit down and be like, not. It doesn't have to be like, this is how you ride a sandworm or this is why we do a thing. Just sort of like when I was a kid living in the dunes, you know, we used to play this
Right.
game like worm rat-a-tat. Like we used to hit the sand and see who would be brave enough to stay out there longer, who would stay out longest, kind of thing. So I don't know, something
Right.
that just sort of gives you this idea of like kids live in this environment
Hmm.
and they play games with the sandworms. They're used to this environment. Something that sort of like, you know, gives you an idea of how family life works in this, not just this war, these warriors, these nomadic warriors, but how does like family life work? That's been lost, as you said, that threat to culture. What has been lost in the years of them fighting with the Harkonnen, that kind of thing. You know,
Hmm.
I don't know. I think that would have just given it that bit of poetry or that sort of bit of something like those kind of things would have been more interesting. But yeah,
Right. What is their civilian? What is their culture like? Right. Their
mm,
civilian culture like. What is a Fremen marriage ceremony like? What is a Fremen? Uh, do they do anything except bury their dead and fight?
yeah.
Like
Yeah,
yeah,
well, they don't even bury the dead. They suck the water out of them and stuff like that. Like,
yeah,
you know, you get that thing. Oh, they return. There's the spiritual side of it, the religious side. But like, all
a
right,
little bit. Yeah.
how do they, like you say, how does a family sit down to a dinner? How, you know, a
Right.
child's born into it. What's their expectations of a child? What's a wedding
Yeah.
ceremony? What other things do they have? Like, you know, do they have holy days? And is that become an issue? Like, you know, they obviously don't
Hmm.
have a Christmas, but do they have
Hmm.
some other religious holiday that like they have to do something for? Like they show them praying and stuff. They do that kind of thing. But like, I don't know, it always feels it's linked back to that. I think there'd be something. There's no family. There's like, as you said, like, what is it you're protecting at this point, other than a bunch of people?
Hmm. Yeah, no, I would have liked more of that. I mean, and I think some of that is that sort of missing poetry,
Mm,
you know. And some of that, I think, it's so. I mean, I find these two movies so weird
mm,
in that my whole life basically, I've wanted another Dune.
yeah,
And this is a franchise that I care about, that I follow. I'm not as into as others. I feel have very mixed feelings about. There's a lot of things that have affected me very deeply about Dune, but
hmm,
there are other things that I am very annoyed by, right? One of is this medieval kind of, technology, but not technology kind of stuff,
yeah,
right? I mean, so I have ambivalent feelings, but I look, I'm so glad that these movies are successful. I love
mm,
Denis Villeneuve. If this is in fact a harbinger of this plot to come, of movies to come, it's probably for better or worse. But you could do a lot worse than auteur, big budget, beautiful science fiction that actually cares about aesthetics. I mean, not I don't have no right to complain, but I'd like to see more than just moving cardboard characters around a setting that only matters if you've already decided to care about
yeah,
and a little bit of that culture, a little bit of that in a 5 hour 6 hour long movie split over two movies. I mean, there's so little for of that kind of you have so much time for that kind of stuff, and I don't know why we get half of what we get instead.
no. What one of the things, you're right, and I'm going to finish on this because we're sort of coming to
Mhm.
time now. But you're right. I think one of the things, the more we've talked about it, I still love this. I love 21 Strong. I still really like this film. I think this film is a massive success. I think it's a great achievement. I think it looks fantastic. I think the cast are actually really good. I think this film, of all the cast, I think Timothy Chalamet is fine. He's pretty good. I
Yeah.
think Zendaya's gone up in my estimations. Um, Definitely. I think that the people that come out of this best for me actually are Um, Rebecca Ferguson, who I've always thought is good, plays Lady
Hmm.
Jessica. I think she's
Yeah.
excellent in this. I think she's really good. Um, I always like Josh Brolin, and I just sort of I see um, Austin Butler in particular being one. I think he's someone I'm going to be watching in the future. Sort of like I've seen him play Elvis, I've seen him play Fade. I think like he's an interesting guy. I'm like, okay,
Mm.
I see you and go, there's something about you. I think you're going to be interesting to watch your choices in the future. And Florence Pugh, the young cast in this are really, really good, and there's lots of good stuff. I think the cast in this are great. I think this really works well. I'm glad they went with the way they went, but with the sort of the Holy War ending, and they've clearly set it up for the sequel. And this is a without real people don't realize that this is the Empire Strikes Back ending. Like this is the downbeat
Mm.
ending.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Um, but one of the things I think that you're right about, and I think maybe it's because it's supposed to have this downbeat ending. And as you've talked about everything you've talked about there. We talked about Lord of the Rings. We've talked about the that sort of the dirtiness of that. And you
Hmm.
talk about the cardboardness of characters, which I think happens a little bit. It's a quest movie. I mean, that's sort of like the definition of people moving around a chessboard is a quest movie where they're like, and then you go to this place to get this thing, and then this thing and this thing. But one of the things I always think about watching that film is Sean Astin as Samwise Gamgee, who when in each of the films, and this sounds stupid because this is me, but like the relationship between Frodo and Sam becomes so sort of like intrinsic to the entire plot. And at the end, when sort of like Frodo falls and he's like, I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you, and he sort of carries him up and stuff like. I remember watching that in the cinema in 2003, and the audience being like silent in the best possible way and being
Mm.
invested in that moment. And like people like, and I know you're gonna be laughing, but people like you were like, tear on that. People were really invested in that moment because they'd watched three films and you'd love that character. Like they'd gone on this
Right.
journey with that character. And I feel the same when like Captain America had. I mean, it's years of work, I know, but there's that moment, and in Avengers Endgame when like you see Cap's able to pick up Thor's hammer and he sort of takes on Thanos, or when it's sort of like it's him versus the Thanos' army, and just tightens the shield. All that is like you going like, yes, I'm invested in this. Now it's blockbuster cinema, but still I'm invested in that one character because they've done something with it. And I know it's only two films, but still, there's no character in this. In this, I would say this: there is no character in this saga so far. If you bring back a third film, I'm gonna go. I care wholeheartedly about the end of their journey. Now, I know this is a different kind
Yeah.
of world and stuff, but there's no like, and it's not supposed to be a fist pumping world, but there's no world. And I'm like, that's the character I'm really rooting for. Like I don't feel like an overwhelming sense of satisfaction when Gurney gets it. It's good, but it's not fist pumping that Gurney gets his revenge.
Nobody's ever cared about Gurney. I mean,
No,
even I mean, come on.
but do you know what I'm saying? Like, but he's then there's no character where you go like, yes, they got what they did what they
Yeah,
needed to do. Even like at the end,
yeah.
Paul
Even the
beating Fade,
Harkonnen. Yeah, right.
like it's not the sort of like the fist pumping sort of like it's almost like it should be like a rousing moment that then the rug is pulled from under you because he does what he does, but it never quite
And
feels
it's
like that.
stupid.
Yeah,
It's really stupid. I mean, like, it's this kind of like, well, even just there's this comment, oh, why do you take these risks, right?
mm,
Yeah, because you're stupid, or you want to, win over everybody there,
yeah.
right? Um, and you're like, look, either I die or I don't, right? Okay, I mean, fine, whatever. I mean, it's whatever. But I mean, no, I don't need likable characters. I don't
Yeah, but
need,
you need to be invested in
like,
them.
but right, but I do need to be invested in the culture, in the story, in the world. I need to know what drives them, what motivates them. I need to have some sense of ability to understand them, if not identify. I don't have that about anybody in this.
That's my point.
Um,
Like I don't care
yeah,
where any of
no, I
them end
agree.
up,
and
good
and
or
I
bad.
think that some of the examples of like Lord of the Rings or Captain America. I mean, it's some of that is just you get to the end of a long thing,
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
let's also just be honest about, like, you get to the end of a season or a TV show and you've watched 8 seasons of 22 episodes a year. By the end of that final season, no matter how bad that show is, I mean, it could be Friends level, scorched earth horrible, you know, but you get to the end of it and you're gonna feel something, even
Mhm.
if it's misjudged, just because you spent so much time with those characters, right? And I think that there is a certain school of thought of these kind of cardboard characters, and Marvel, to its credit, does do, the emotive kind of Back to the Future kind of moments. It tries, here and there. It comes off as kind of hollow a lot, but they try. You know, this movie doesn't try to do any of that, and
Mm.
I
Mm.
mean, I'm okay with that. I just don't know why I'm supposed to care. I don't know
Yeah.
why I'm supposed to care about anything in this movie. Um, and I don't know why anybody does care. I mean, I don't know why anyone watches this movie and is like, I am so invested in how spice production changed on Arrakis in this,
Well,
and the Emperor was dethroned. I mean,
is this the next
like
Avatar?
it's a plot.
Is this the next Avatar? It's going to make $1
Well,
billion,
let's.
but then
I'd rather this succeed than fucking Avatar,
yeah. But my
right?
point.
I
That's my
mean,
point. Has been is this something where like it will make $1 billion, $2 billion, but then sort of 6 years, 7 years later, everyone's like, how did that make $1 billion? Like everyone went to see it, but no one remembers it. I don't know. Is this going to be, or is it going to be
the-
the influencer of the next decade? I don't know.
these are really weird movies to do this well, right?
Yeah.
Let's be really clear. These are, and I'm glad that they are, right? Again, all my complaints, I still think this is a fair to good movie. It's
Mm.
definitely not great, but it is a fair to good movie, I still think, I mean, this is better than my average, I don't ever want to see another movie in the theaters,
Yeah.
but I would love to see this on my big screen TV. But the thing is, I mean, I can do my writing and do my work and read a book with this on in the background, and I'm not missing anything.
Mm.
I hate to say it,
Mm.
but
No, I don't know. I think I could, if I was to sit and watch it, I think I'd invest in it to watch it again. But it's not because of the length and because of other things. I don't think it's not like I don't see it as popcorn films. I think
but you also can get into like the Lord of the Rings thing, and you can get into
yes,
like it's a saga. I just am gonna go into it. It's amazing that they did this. I don't need to like believe in this world, or I'm just gonna give my heart to this.
yeah, I can do that, and I don't, but I don't feel that I'm doing it for Dune.
With Dune, yeah,
Maybe it's my age and the things.
fair.
I remember going in to see the first Lord of the Rings film,
Oh my
2001.
god,
What? I remember that going in to see it 2001, and at the end of
right?
it,
And
like, and having read the book
uh-huh,
around the same time, and then going like,
uh-huh,
and it getting to the end, and the whole thing of Boromir falling and Sam and Frodo going off and being like, yeah, I want to see the rest of this. I want to see the next film, knowing that
yeah.
they'd been done back to back. Like I was like, yeah, I'm into this. I am. I'm not going to go off and start buying Lord of the Rings merch. I didn't really go that far, but like, I was in for the ride to
That
watch
is,
the next films.
I think I've told you I went to see the first Lord of the Rings. It's the only one I have seen all the way through. Well, even that I haven't seen all the way through because I went to see it with a child that I was like escorting and babysitting for the day. And consequently, that is the only movie that I not only have left during its runtime, but have left about 6 times.
Hmm.
Because it was so bad. It was just objectively fucking horrible. So unwatchably bad. Um, I cannot describe, I mean, I still will never get over the trauma of watching Gandalf's suicide scene. You know, watching a wizard who I don't know why anyone cares about committing suicide and just going, why? Why would you shoot it this way? Why would anyone care about
Oh no, I
this?
love that. I
You
will
know,
fight you on this. I will fight you on Lord of the Rings.
horrible.
I'll
Well,
fight you on Lord of the
I
Rings.
mean, I mean, look, I guess some of this is just the science fantasy, like just put a name on a index card, and that's character A. Put another name on an index card, and that's character B. Put a MacGuffin, and that's character C. And now you've got a plot. Let's watch that for 6 hours. And partly what I hate about Dune, I love these ideas, I love the images. What I hate about Dune is that same sense.
Yeah.
Of
and I think that's why it's going to have but I think that's why it's going to have a similar cultural impact eventually. Maybe, I don't know, we shall see out the back of part 2.
There's no way I'm going to live for the next 10 years. There's no way we're going to be able to do this podcast in 10 years. I'm going to be like, I hate them. I hate everything. I hate the culture. Burn it down.
We'll be back in 2030 for June. For Chapter House June, and it's completely. They won't get. There's a point where they can't go any further because they're not going to do God Emperor June because
all the characters change.
Change.
Are you going to do Leto as a God Emperor worm?
Half worm, half. Yeah. It's not. No, they won't do that. They'll be like, we'll stop here because after this it gets too crazy. Anyway, we shall stop there ourselves. We have talked about June for long enough, I think, and we're coming to the end. So, Julian.
Sorry, guys. I'm sorry to shit on a thing that you all love. I'm just asking questions.
That's the thing, though. It's fair. It's some of it's fair. I think we've highlighted the positives as well, but I think we've discussed some of it, and I'd like to say we discuss it in the wider context of this kind of sci-fi fantasy cinema. Anyway, if you disagree, come find us. We'll fight you anytime. Now, if you want,
that comes off the wrong way, brother.
It does. I've just realised how that sounded.
Find where we live.
Come at us, bro. Come at me. Find us on Twitter at PodTimeSpace. Let us know what your thoughts are. No, I'm serious. I want to know. I realise how what did you give this on IMDb or Letterboxd? Let me know, because I'm curious as to how people think. And do you disagree or agree with our comments? Has it made you think twice about some of the things in there? Very, very curious about how people see it. We'll see this in 2-3 years. Anyway, for now, this has been a bit of an interlude, and we're back to our Black Mirror sort of carried on. But we are sort of creeping up on the next season, and we are going to be doing post-apocalypse is our sort of next season, and it's going to get mad very, very soon into this sort of. So that's a hint. There you go. So
excellent.
Anyway, for now, Julian, thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
I appreciate the time.
Glad to do this.
Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.